This is the Tesoro AI podcast with Darius Gant. AI is changing the world and fast. This episode is coming to you courtesy of Tesoro AI, the #1 recruiting service for software development and AI talent.
All right, Z, welcome to the show. I appreciate you taking some time out to join us.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to be here, Darius, and thank you for the invite.
My pleasure. So hopping in, you seem to be a serial founder. What you're building now with, I believe, and Pythagoras is super interesting, and we'll get to that. But want to talk more about kind of some of the other ventures you've been a part of before arriving at Pythagoras and the progression of your career.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So first, hi everyone. My name is Zvonimir, but everyone calls me Z. After college, I started my first startup. It was a collaborative whiteboard. It was basically, you have a whiteboard, you have a link, and whoever is on the link can draw on the same whiteboard. It's a pretty viral product. It had 1.5 million monthly active users, and it was mostly used by teachers in schools where they would connect the whole classroom and they would basically teach that way with remote students. I ran for 5 years. Eventually, we sold it to Miro. And after the acquisition, I hired my best friend and we started working on different ML problems. And eventually we came to Pythagora with the whole, ChatGPT revolution. So yeah, now we are here today.
Yeah, maybe you just alluded to it now, but I'm curious, why AI? Where did the desire to kind of build a product in this AI ecosystem, where'd that come from? Were you working on AI in previous startups?
No, my previous startup was a typical SaaS product. Actually, when I sold my previous company, I was literally talking to one of my mentors, and he was very much he was thinking about what technologies he wants to focus on, and he was choosing between crypto and ML. And before that, I didn't know. I knew about crypto a little bit, but I never wrote anything with it. And neither I did know too much about ML. Then I bought a book about how to build like ML models from scratch, and I just saw a tremendous opportunity. Like this was before LLMs, right? Just building plain models like neural networks and stuff like that. And I fell in love with that, and I fell in love with opportunities, and we started off from there.
Now, did you yourself ever get into any actual model building?
Yeah, actually, the first model that so what we're working on right now, it's basically an agentic system that builds applications, like writes code. But our first ML model, that was in 2020 or 2022. The first model that we created, it was from the ground up, like in Python, just built a huge neural network.
Yeah.
It was basically taking design and building an HTML and CSS from it. And it was building it from the ground up without any large language models.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really fell in love with about this AI space. It's not new, but once it kind of hit the mainstream, there were so few people that were actually in the industry, and there was so much demand that when it comes to talent, you could learn how to build anywhere, and folks are like, yeah, okay, you didn't have to come from some well-known program, some well-known computer science program like we see in software development. With AI, it's like, oh, you took this online class? All right, good. Let's get started. And, like you, I think back in, was it 2018, I was looking at technologies like robotic process automation, blockchain, and then eventually AI. And it kind of actually went in that order in terms of where my interests landed. The thing that stuck with me with AI was that it was the only technology of those where you were seeing actual products being built and deployed, right? So, the hype now is still far greater than what we see on a day-to-day. But like blockchain, it was like, oh, this is cool. There's a lot of uses for it. But like no one was actually buying it at that time. So I was like, okay, AI is where it's at. There's actual practical applications of AI that someone would be willing to pay for.
Yeah, I mean, that was always my problem with crypto, where I didn't see people actually using it, being in use. There's always this, application of like just transferring money over the borders and stuff like that. But there's so many crypto projects where I don't think almost none of them are actually used like in a daily life. So yeah.
Yeah, I just felt like it was still a little bit early. There everything is early, but like we haven't arrived at that point where we're seeing a lot of use cases in the wild. Okay, so I won't go off on a tangent. That's a whole nother conversation. But just thinking about Pythagoras, I would love for you to talk more about, as you decided AI is where you wanted to be. What was the problem that you identified? And you said, "Hey, look, this right here needs to be solved."
I mean, as I mentioned, the first, HTML, CSS generation, this is something I'm a developer and I always like hated doing HTML, CSS. It was such a tedious work where you just have to, to tweak things until they end up being good. And we started off from there, and then we started talking to users. We talked like to a bunch. Like I believe before we ended up on Pythagora, I think I talked to over 200 people. We went from HTML, CSS generation. Actually, that ended up not being such a big problem because companies have their HTML, CSS developers, and when something is not perfect, they just don't care,
Right.
and it wasn't a big enough problem for us to go after. After that, we went into generating automated tests, and this is where actually LLMs came out and GPT 3.5 came out, and we saw that automated tests can be generated super easily. The problem with that was that actually the tests were when you generate a test from a code, the problem is that the test itself might contain a bug and might be like a passing test, but
And when you say
testing for
test, you're actually testing software for bugs, right? So like QA, is that what you're referring to?
automated QA, like
Automated.
automated tests, yeah, ingest, for example, Selenium and these kind of
Mm-hmm.
technologies. So, and this actually what came from developers. They told me like, hey, I would be more confident in this was like top consistent feedback that we got, that people would be more confident in AI generating code out of the tests that they write rather than tests being generated from the code they write. Because when you write a test, you know that this is exactly what needs to happen, and they would rather get the code from a test rather than vice versa. And that's when we pivoted to Pythagora, or in the beginning it was called GPT Pilot. By the way, the core of Pythagora, the core agentic system, is called GPT Pilot, and it's fully open sourced. So it's available on GitHub. And yeah, that's where it started.
So can you break that down, just in case for folks who may not be in the software development arena, you've got this test and from the test you get code. Like what does that mean in layman's terms?
Yeah, so basically, all applications there, they consist of the code, like the browser that we're looking at right now, the desktop, all the applications, there are a bunch of code. Now, all the code have specific cases. For example, one case is me clicking on like remove video button, then leave this call, then mute audio. These are all specific cases. So what people do when the code base become larger and larger, sometimes they have like millions of lines of code. When you change one part of the code, that might affect some feature that you're not even working on right now. So for example, if I change, something I'm working in settings with something with audio, that might break the ability for me to mute and unmute myself on this call.
Mm-hmm.
So what people do, once they implement a feature, they create a test that it's a snippet of code that runs this case. So what a test could do, click and mute audio button, and it would check if the audio is actually muted after that button is clicked. So that's one test. So once you create that test, you commit it to the repository, to the code, and year later, if I change something in settings, when before I push my code to production, I will run all the tests that are created, And this specific test, if it fails, it will tell me, hey, you made some mistake, you need to fix that. I hope this makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense, right? And so basically the test, it's code that kind of sits aside and you don't have to implement it into the actual code because that could end up damaging the entire application.
Yeah, so tests don't have anything to do with the end user. They're
Mhm.
only for developers who are working on the code base.
Got it. Got it. And so the next step is from that test. Now what Pythagora is doing is automatically generating code from there.
Yeah, so we actually started from this is called TDD or test driven development. This concept is that basically before you write the feature, you write a test that in the beginning it fails because the code is not implemented.
Mhm.
But first you write a test and then you start writing the code. And every time you write something, you run a test and you write the code until the test passes. And that's when you know, okay, now my code works. This is called test-driven development. This is where we started from. We ended up now basically writing the code from specifications, from user prompts, rather than from tests. And actually, just before this, I was discussing with my co-founders that we need to add tests back into the whole creation process. So we're about to release that, but at this moment, it's writing code from the user specifications. You can think of it as you're talking in natural language, and
Mm.
Pythagora builds the application and manages the code base.
If you're a hiring manager and you appreciate the unique skill sets required to build AI solutions, then I would highly suggest you get your hands on our AI talent salary guide. As you know, one of the greatest challenges in building AI products is acquiring the right team. Over 100 plus pages, we dive deep into our global AI talent acquisition strategies. And with our networks in Latin America, we also provide you with actionable advice on how you can scale up your AI team cost efficiently. Once you explore our AI talent acquisition strategies, you'll never look at hiring the same way again. Links are in the description. Okay, so that's interesting, right? Because that's where kind of the LLM, things of that nature come into play. Someone says, here's what I want built, here's the specifications. And then from there, that's when Pythagora creates the test.
Yes, correct. So, yeah. So basically, Pythagora, when you say, okay, I want to implement a feature for, I don't know, muting an audio, let's say, what
Right.
it would do, it would write the code, it would write the test, and then it would let you to see if everything is working like you want it or not. And then once that's done, it would commit it and continue on.
Got
Just so I will do this right now to go on the next
it. The way of the
second
sun.
slide. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So from there, you mentioned CSS, you mentioned that, that was your starting point, but you realized that most of the developers within inside of these organizations, once they have written the code, people are just kind of like, hey, we're not concerned about it. Where did you pivot to? If you can come back to that, where did you pivot to and why was that the area where you found more ROI?
I'm not sure if I understand. You mean how did we pivot from generating tests to Pythagora,
Oh,
or
I'm sorry. Maybe I misunderstood what you said, but you said you initially started with HTML and then decided that HTML and CSS were not areas where these developers within inside the organizations would get a lot of ROI from what you all were building from Pythagora, and then you had pivoted to. Were you saying you pivoted to tests, but was that on a different type or a different coding language?
yeah. So basically, we went from HTML, CSS to generating tests from the code. So
Got
let's say that you have a code, but because writing tests, not all developers do it because it's just time consuming. So
it.
some people just write code and just leave it and hope that everything will be fine.
Yeah,
So basically, the value proposition there is that you can have tests without having to write them. From that point, from generating only tests, we went into what Pythagora is doing right now, basically generating applications.
got it, got it. And so, with that in mind, I'm curious, how are you proving ROI? Like, are there specific metrics that you cite? Whether it be time saving, whether it be, fewer bugs, cost savings? I'm curious if there's ROI metrics that you cite.
So we have KPIs that we're tracking that tells us how good the technology is working. And this is at the end, once you're done with the application, and you're asked, like, hey, how how well your app is working, then you can say, hey, it works great. Yes, it works, but not completely, and a couple of other options. So that's the main KPI that we're tracking. In terms of the ROI that we're presenting to companies, I don't have specific numbers, but usually, at least the calls that I have, it's pretty self-explanatory because we're basically competing. So let's say that you're a company and
Mm-hmm.
you want to build an internal tool. To build an internal tool, you can either build it yourself,
Mm-hmm.
which is very expensive and time-consuming, or two, you can buy software. Now, if you buy software, actually, there is a research a couple of years ago that came out that 88% of features in most SaaS tools are not being used by individual users. So you as a user, if you open up, let's say, HubSpot.
Mm-hmm.
HubSpot is a well-known CRM, but likely if you start using HubSpot, likely you will use only a small number of features because HubSpot is made for millions and millions of people to use it. So what is Pythagoras' value proposition is that you can build fully customized tools within a day or two of work.
Got it. Got it. It's interesting study that I forget, I'm going to have to look up where I got this data point from, but it was it was looking at the spend and where corporations were investing in AI. And, I think it was almost, at first corporations were of the mindset that they were going to go 100, almost 100% towards, vendors, right? Because most companies didn't have the talent in house to build. And then it started to switch, right? So I think more people are moving more towards a 50-50 split. If you think about, and you mentioned a lot of folks were thinking about, well, we could build the tool in-house, right, for automated testing. What would be for you the critical decisions that you would talk through with a company that kind of was, hey, should we get Pythagora or do we go out and try to build this ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's not even comparable, right? So, yeah, I mean, basically, when I think about comparing Pythagora to building in house, I think of building in house with all the AI tools that are available right now. So, if you're using Cursor, if you're using ChatGPT, if you're using like Bolt or Lovable, or all these tools together, if you have the whole AI suite versus Pythagora. And in that case, Pythagoras still provides the edge in terms of the speed of how long does it take you to build the application. But more importantly, we provide a set of features after the application is done. So it's not about coding itself. It's about deployment and most importantly, secure deployment. So
Mm-hmm.
what companies want with internal tools is not only to have a tool that is developed, they want to be able to release it, but to release it only for their internal users. And how we provide this is that we are managing the authentication, authorization, access control, and all these things. So the AI, our kind of premise is that you want to offload debugging to AI, you want to offload code management, but you don't want to offload security to AI
Mm-hmm.
because you're never sure what happens there. So basically, what happens is that Pythagora builds the actual tool, the buttons, the clicking, and all these things. Once you deploy it on a super secure cloud that is behind the authentication layer, which allows only your users to access the tool.
Okay, okay. And is it true? One thing I've seen is code generation via AI has created a kind of ballooning code base, right? Are you seeing similar, I guess, similar trend?
So what do you mean exactly by ballooning code base?
So just more, I guess I would say more code, right? But because the ease of just, because I can use natural language to create code, it just allows me to create more code because I'm not sitting there, typing away, coding myself.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, I think that this is what is going to happen going forward. Our whole premise is that, hey, like up until today, you were buying software. Now you can have fully customized software made for you. It's like you go to H&M or some
Mhm.
random store and you get a tailor who gets your measurements and give you specific clothing that's specifically, tailored for you. So that obviously entitles that there will be much more code being built, which I think is good. The code and developers, that is the bottleneck today. Everyone needs developers. Developers are so well paid, and these kind of things. So I think that's a good thing for sure.
Yeah. What do you think about, well, when you write the code needs to be correct, I should say. How do you go from natural language to correct code? That's a very broad question.
No, and to be honest, I think that's a great question. I think this is the most important question of all. So basically, what how we handle this in Pythagora is we put the human in the center of the testing process. So that one of the earliest things that we realized, so we thought that Pythagora will just build the application and humans will just say, hey, there's an error here, there's an error there. But it's not that simple. It's not about having errors or having bugs.
Mhm.
Sometimes when you build something, when you see how it works, you as a human, as a user who will be the end user of this application, you say, well, I don't like how this looks. I want it to work a little differently. So actually what happens in Pythagora is that first Pythagora splits the whole application development process into tasks.
Mhm.
It implements the task, and after it implements one small part, it asks you to test it and to tell it if it's the way that you want it or not.
Mhm.
And this is also about being correct in a sense that working and not having bugs, but also being correct as in being the way that you want it to be.
Right.
So putting human in the center of the whole process is what Pythagora does. And for example, Pythagora is not used for a couple of minutes. Like there are many tools that you put in, you get something in a couple of minutes, and that's it. You use for Pythagora for hours and days.
Mhm.
But once you're done, you have production ready app. You can deploy it and use it right away.
So it sounds like what you're saying is there may be certain standards, you know, as to how an individual team wants the code formatted, how they want the look and feel of the code to be. And so is it the case that Pythagora learns that, and then when it writes more code, it's kind of learned the tendencies, the wants of the team that is using Pythagora?
Well, no. So Pythagora doesn't. So with Pythagora, you can change the code base the way you want it. That's not a
Hmm.
problem. But we're focusing our users to be focused on the end goal, the actual application that they get, rather than on the code. Actually, like I would say, more than 99% of users who use Pythagora don't write a single line of code. It is completely done by AI, and especially the rapid progress that LLMs are making, I think very soon applications will not be built. At least the internal tools, the applications from scratch, will not be built by humans at all. So we want to focus people to look at the end result, the actual application, and not the code base itself.
Got it. Is there any element of documentation, or is that up to kind of the human that's in the loop?
So Pythagora writes documentation itself. It's because we still want to give this ability to users to see the code base, access it, and all these things. But the way that we are seeing our users use it, most often they don't touch the code base. So I think very soon, within a couple of years, I
Mm.
think documentation and just the code base itself will be obsolete thing.
Did-
At least for smaller tools.
Got it. Right. Because you're looking at the application itself. And so any adjustments, you're using natural language to make adjustments based on how the application works versus based on how it's written.
Correct, correct. And that's the whole point. We want to focus people, focus builders. I always think about myself. I used to love Lego when I was a kid, right?
Hmm.
Building blocks. And that's what we want to enable people to do, to think of like, hey, I'm doing this tedious task and I want to replace, I want to automate this. I don't want to, type in from one sheet to another the whole day. I want this to happen automatically. Can you build me an application for this? And we want to focus on building rather than on debugging, on documentation, and all these things.
Yeah. I guess from your perspective, because we're starting to hear a lot about code generation in combination with AI. Obviously, you still got a lot of folks who are still doing, the hard work, right? Going out there and coding. Relative to your human, how much coding can AI do? And I can't say who's better because everyone has different levels of skill set, but relative to the best coders, where's AI?
You know, there is this sentiment on the market where everyone says like, hey, AI is like a junior developer, which to be honest, I don't agree at all. What I see by do, it does on the level that the most senior people do it.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is happening, obviously it cannot do everything, it cannot process big code bases and all these things. But if you ask it to do some niche thing, like ask it to build a neural network, it will build it. What I think is happening, what I think is happens with humans and individually as well, is when a developer comes onto the new code base that someone else has written, there is a very, very big chance that they will say, hey, who wrote this code base? This is such a shitty code. Who wrote this, right? And I think when people see that from an AI, they can just say, "Oh, that's AI," because it just doesn't work or whatever. But I think that people would react the same way if you give them the humanly written code as well. It would actually, now when I think about this, it might be good to create like a sort of coding. What is it called? The test. Oh my God, I cannot remember the guy from World War II, that Turing's test.
Okay.
Do you know what's Turing's test?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, you can
It would
feel
be
free to break it down. I don't know that everyone is familiar.
so Turing's test is basically the concept, which is now obsolete, but literally until a couple of years ago, it was a way to determine how good machines can think. And it would basically be is if you are behind, let's say, you don't see who is on the other side, and you just get the written answers, and you're talking, you're asking questions and answering, and you're getting the answers on a piece of paper. Could you say confidently that you're talking to a machine or talking to a human? And up until like a couple of years ago, you would know that relatively easily that you're talking to a computer. Now with LLMs, you don't know anymore. It's like the Turing test has been broken. Actually, Alan Turing, he was a maybe you can call it. It was actually cryptographer from the World War II. It was pretty a long time ago when he created this test, and it couldn't be broken for a long time. And LLMs actually broke this test and enabled computers to be on a human level. And now what I was thinking is it might be good to test engineers and to give them code base that was written by AI and code base that was written by humans, and tell them and see if they could identify which one is built by AI. To be honest, I think they wouldn't be able to.
Well, what's interesting and what this made me think about is, and this is not a coding example, but a lot of times I'll get, feedback or, from someone on my team and it's just written in a way I'm like, I have no clue what this means. I can kind of sit because, and it could be something as simple as punctuation, but because of the way, we read with punctuation, all these other, how that becomes very important based on the meaning, it takes a minute to just sit down and understand what whoever wrote it meant. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll just copy and paste it into like a chat GPT and be like, just rewrite this. So because I may need to forward that commentary, right? Rewrite this in a way that I can forward and someone will easily understand what it means. Oh, now I got a perfectly written sentence with even better context than what the original human writer did.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, 100%. Yeah.
So yeah, interesting to apply that to coding. So a question I have for you: if AI, right? If we can look at AI as beginning to replace some of the things that a developer would have to do, where do you think that takes the developer, right? Like, where do they start to spend their time now that some of the kind of that basic blocking and tackling is done by an AI?
Yeah, I mean, look, the transition will be like a long transition. Pythagora, for example, it builds the application from scratch. If
Mhm.
you give it like some kind of a huge code base, it would get lost like very easily. So developers, what developers are doing, they will be doing this likely for years and years into the future. But I think that they will be just more and more focused on building blocks. The way that I think about it is memory allocation. Like 20 years ago, if you would write some software, you would have to be very careful about how you allocate the memory
Hmm.
on the device that it's being run on. Today, if you're building a JavaScript application, you're not even thinking about, in some cases you do, but in 99% of the cases, you don't even think about the memory. There's just like a higher level of abstraction where it was figured out and people, made it work so that memory is automatically, adjusted or whatever it's happening with it. And I think the same will happen with the code. It might need, 10, 20 years until the code as code becomes like a very niche thing. But to be honest, like I would be surprised if in 20 years from now, people are building code as in writing the code and learning syntaxes for different languages and stuff.
Yeah. One of the interesting parallels I've been experimenting with video generation. And obviously, well, I not obviously, I have no skill set within creating any type of cinematic films or whatever it may be. But since you can do it with a via natural language, I'm like, okay, let me go try it. And one of the takeaways that I had from it is, now because they've kind of brought the technical skill required to produce a video or generate a video, the core skill becomes how do you then become creative enough to one, instruct properly the AI to create what you want it to create, and then two, in this case, you can create 10-second clips. So how do I now string those clips together to tell a story, right? And so the interesting part is like the job, the nature of what you're doing as someone who's, if the end product is creating a video, or in your case creating an app, the core skill set becomes being this like maestro of a musical, right? And making sure everything comes together in a way that is beautiful to the end user.
I think you put it very well. I think the key term here is creative, because if you want to create a movie like or something like that, you want to be creative. You don't want to deal with how to cut things and how to do some mechanical things. You just want to express yourself. And I think, just like you said, like a maestro, you are orchestrating some type of creative work. Either it is like building an app or building a movie. Just it helps you be more creative and not focus on mechanical things and like how to
Yeah.
click something.
Yeah. How does AI learn how to produce correct code? Not so much from, I know you mentioned having the human in the loop, right? But before the human is, if I'm not mistaking your process, the AI is already creating some level of code, the humans in the loop to make changes, right? But how does AI go from nothing, right, or zero to, okay, we understand how to produce what we've interpreted via natural language?
Yeah, I mean, the way that we're thinking, whenever we're implementing something into Pythagora, we're thinking about, okay, what would we do as humans? And
Hmm.
then just replace our cognitive process with LLM. So, how regular software development works is that it is very different than, let's say, from writing or from different things. Where you're writing, you write something, you look at it, you maybe change some things, and that's pretty much it. With code, what is really great for, at least for automating it, is that you have this feedback loop that helps LLMs, but it helps humans as well. The way that programmers write code, they write something, run the application and test it. This is something that humans are doing constantly. You're using AI or not. And what we did with Pythagora is that Pythagora writes code, runs it. It can automatically see if there's an error. If there's an error, it just fixes it automatically. If there is not an error, then it tells the human, hey, can you check it out, how it works? So basically, you have this feedback loop that is very natural for developers to go through that basically tells the LLM, tells the AI if everything is working or not. And not only that, it also tells it what is not working. If you see an error, it will tell you literally on what line the error is happening. So basically, to answer your question, the answer is in the feedback loop, which is happening in developers, and we just translate it to the AI.
How'd you think about kind of go to market? Was it something where you kind of push this to individual developers, or do you try to talk to organizations and say, hey, let's get your team to test this out?
So we started off as an open source project. So we really went the masses. Currently, GPT Pilot is the core of Pythagora. It has 32,000 GitHub stars. So it gained popularity amongst developers. And right now, what we're doing now, we're obviously in the next stage as a company, and we're building like a business case around it. And now we're talking about companies and getting individual case studies on how well Pythagora works in different companies.
Do you think it's something that is more quickly adopted by maybe smaller company startups, or is this something that enterprises are like, hey, look, we've got, we're writing a ton of code. This would be really high ROI just because of volume. Is it something that they're more ready to adopt?
Well, I mean,
And
smaller
I'm not
companies are
expecting,
always.
I'm just asking for your initial thoughts, right? Still startup world, still something very new for the world. But I'm curious of your initial thoughts based on what you've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing new, but obviously smaller companies are much easier to adapt to anything, right? They don't have processes. Like for example, we have one enterprise client where we're going on literally for months to get the contract done, and they want to do it, but so many key people in their company have to give a sign off, and so it's always much harder with bigger companies. Yeah, I think it's nothing new with AI. Yeah.
Can individual developers use this? Like, can they just, download this and say, hey, look, I need this. I want this to work, alongside me to speed up my individual ability.
Absolutely, and I mean this is where in terms of like individual people who are using Pythagora comes the most people who just want to create something that they weren't able to create before. Because what is happening right now, up until AI revolution, only skilled developers were able to build something. And right now, this expands to what we call a citizen developer.
Mm-hmm.
So, citizen developer is someone who had some experience with the code. So, Pythagora is not for someone who never saw code base at all. You have to have some technical knowledge. But if you even played with some scripts, if you're like a DevOps person, or if you're a programmer that stopped programming 10 years ago, and for you to learn like modern languages that take years again, those people are now able to build something, to be creative and not to be limited by their knowledge, because
Mm-hmm.
knowledge is embedded into Pythagora. You just explain what you want to do, and Pythagora builds it. So yes, to your question, a lot of individuals use Pythagora to build their projects, their whatever it can be, from something in the workplace to their startups. A lot of people are starting new companies because they are able to build something very quickly and test it out on the market. If you don't know how to code, it will take you at least like $5,000 to get someone to build an MVP, at least, at
Mm-hmm.
least. And right now with Pythagora, for a couple $100, you can have everything ready, ship it, and test it out to the market. So a lot of things are changing.
And I understand code is written in English globally. Well, I mean, at least I think that's the case, right? But do you support other languages? So, for example, someone in Latin America who speaks Spanish only but knows how to code, can they
Yeah.
Use natural language and then the code, and then still create code.
So, well, first of all, in terms of like the code and variables in the code, I don't know who does it in their in their home language. I think everything is done in English, like in
Yeah.
terms of like variables. But in terms of like how you convey things to Pythagora, currently our whole interface is in English. Just we're still a startup and we don't have resources. But the good thing is that if you write it in any language, it will understand it. And this is the like beauty of LLMs. You can talk to it about computer science, biology, chemistry, history, whatever you want, in any language you want, and it doesn't care. It is so general that it can, take in any kind of input. So yeah, if you just write it in Spanish or in Portuguese, it will work right away.
Awesome. No, I can definitely see kind of the value prop there from the perspective of just becoming a global product. You all are YC24. I'm curious your experience. What are some of the benefits you've derived from being a part of it? How is it maybe advanced where you all are on a go-to-market or perhaps on even the product side?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I literally say this from since we finished YC. One of the best business decisions that I have made was to apply for YC. It was such a beneficial thing for us that I cannot have better words for YC than this. Since I'm a second time founder, before we applied, I was thinking, I mean, I know all the common startup advice, I know all the things, and actually my friend who went through YC, he was telling me, just listen to me, just apply, just do it. And we applied and we got accepted. And this was, as I mentioned, the best thing that we've done. And actually, what my friend used to tell me before we applied is the best thing is going to be in YC, not like talking to mentors, not talking to successful entrepreneurs, but rather being surrounded by other founders. And I used to think, I mean, how beneficial it is, when I'm surrounded by many people who are just like me, how can they help me? But actually, exactly ended up being the case. And the reason for that is that you're seeing people around you, what are they able to achieve in like 2 week periods? So
Mm-hmm.
basically, YC is split into many 2 week periods. And when you see other people just like you achieving these great things,
Yeah.
then you think to yourself, I mean, why can't I do it? And it pushes your ambition, pushes your ability to execute so much that it's like anyone who's listening to this, if you have an idea, just apply to IC. Don't even think about it.
You, after finishing YC, went on to raise 4 million. AI was probably, across the fundraising slump of 2022, 2023, and even we could throw 2024 in there. AI was like the only bright spot for fundraising. What was your experience like? Did an investor's knowledge of AI impact your decision on, well, we believe this would be the right investor for us? Overall, what was your experience like with the fundraise?
I mean, so first, I have two experiences fundraising. We started fundraising before YC. We fundraised for 5 weeks and we weren't able to fundraise. Then we got into YC and we stopped. And that was a that was a traumatic experience. After YC, we raised in 2 weeks. We were oversubscribed. It was like very easy because we got a lot of traction during YC,
Okay.
and many things were in place. So it was pretty easy for us to fundraise after. In terms of investors' feedback, I mean, no one knows, these things. AI is such a new thing, and who can tell you, like, hey, this is correct or this is not correct?
Right.
Everyone has their opinions. I think the more important thing is for you to find investors who align with your thinking about the future. And if you find that, I think it will be natural.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know there were kind of, well, in the past, you had AI specific investors, right? Their entire thesis was based on AI, and they still exist. But now it seems like everyone has AI, at least a part of their investment thesis. When you sat down with the investors, was it clear to you, like, okay, they understand, these guys understand AI? These, not necessarily. Or, I mean, maybe it was a scenario where folks were just like, look, I don't care. Let's just talk about the traction. That's more important to me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, definitely sometimes you sit with an investor and you can see that they don't know anything. They have their own checklist, like, hey, what is your traction? What is your go-to market? What is your team? And they have just a list of things that they need to ask you, and that's it. But obviously, those investors don't know what's happening. I think the good investors have a opinion. You know, I cannot say to even an investor when they tell me like, "Hey, my thesis is this and this." What tells me that they came prepared is that they have some kind of an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Because not even me and no one knows what the future holds and what will happen in the future. But as long as they have some kind of structured thought through thinking or opinion that tells you that they did some homework. And there are investors like that for sure. There are I met a lot of ambitious investors, good investors for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see, okay, thinking about Gen AI, Chat GPT being like the bomb that kind of broke all of this open, created this wave of interest in AI? What do you think is the next big thing on the AI or Gen AI front, or just something that people should keep their eyes peeled for?
I mean, literally everything that's happening. Just yesterday, I had a call with one influencer, like in YouTube, and he's telling me that now on like he has a whole team of people who work for him, but now his reels on Instagram, he doesn't even do it anymore. Because he filmed himself. There's a specific program where you film yourself in specific, postures or whatever, and it generates you talking basically. And I was watching the videos that were generated, and I couldn't tell the difference. And it's crazy. Like, I have a feeling literally on all sides, everything that's happening in AI is so mind blowing. And obviously, what we're seeing with Pythagora, we're seeing crazy user stories. For example, one told us that they were quoted for a tool within a company, $125,000 to get this implemented, and he only needed like a small subset of the tool, and he built it within 2 days with Pythagora, and he
Mm,
had more features than what $125,000 tool would provide them. This is
mm,
just mind blowing, and he
mhm.
didn't write a single line of code. So I think just following AI in general and whatever interests people, just follow AI for that, and I think the future is just crazy.
Yeah. And I know we're coming up on time here, but I did want to leave a moment for you to make anything. We're rolling into 2025 in about a month here, but anything that we should keep our eyes out for coming from Pythagora. Any announcements you want to make? Floor is yours.
Yeah, well, I would just encourage everyone just to check out Pythagora. If you're looking to build something either for your own startup, but especially if you want to build something for your work that will improve your processes, your work. If you do go to Pythagora.ai, check out what we're doing. I'm sure that we can help you in that. Feel free to even send me an email. It's right there on the website. I'll be super happy to talk to you. And basically, what we're doing right now, we're working closely with companies who want to build internal tooling suite, and we are enabling them to build it in a record time, not writing a single line of code. So if you have this use case, feel free to contact me. I'll be super happy to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, Z, this is great. I learned a lot. I'm sure other folks learned a lot, and kind of looking at the forefront of what's happening in AI. It's exciting to see what you guys are doing at Pythagoras. So I appreciate you taking some time to join us and sharing as much as you have.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure, Darius.